class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today is the day that we will be discussing my 5 bold predictions heading into the 22-23 seasons. I've been doing this for the past few years, and this year will be no different. Starting off right away here with a prediction that Oscar Lindblom, will get to 50 plus points this season. Last year, I didn't have too much success with my bold predictions. The only one that came relatively close to actually coming true was my prediction that Barabanov would score 50 plus points in that 21-22 year, which he came rather close to doing. So I'm going to double down on being right then and try to be right now with a different player. Lindblom has a pretty decent chance of being a 50-point player in this upcoming season, not only because he has showed potential in the past, not necessarily so recently, but in the past of his career to be that type of second-line 50-point guy. But on top of that, the Sharks have pretty open spots in their top 6 at the moment. You have Couture, you have Hertl, you have Meier, and you have Barabanov. And then there's 2 empty spots in the Sharks' top 6. One of them you might be able to reserve to William Eklund. But after that, you have Kevin Labanc? Probably not. Luke Kunin? Probably not. So who else would really fit in to this spot besides someone like Lindblom? So as long as he plays pretty good, it shouldn't be too difficult to actually lock down a spot in the Sharks' top 6, at which point you'll be, hard pressed to not at the very least get 35-ish, maybe even 40 points. And I think Lindblom will be good enough to even boost that up to this 50. Next on the list is that Ryan Merkley will score 40 plus points in this upcoming season. This is entirely based on the fact of the absence of Brent Burns. Brent Burns was traded to the Carolina Hurricanes, and so everybody on the right-hand side of the defense for the San Jose Sharks got moved up the depth chart because, of course, Brent Burns was right there at the top. This means that Erik Karlsson is going to be filling in all of the offensive gap left by Brent Burns. He is going to be definitely now the number 1 guy on the Sharks power play, the number 1 guy just generally when the Sharks are looking for a goal, whether they're down by 1 late in the third period or anything like that generally. So Erik Karlsson, will see how he manages to do in that role. However, Brent Burns could be reliable enough to play all 82 games season every single year that he played. Erik Karlsson, of course, cannot be relied on for such a thing. In his 4 years with the San Jose Sharks thus far, he has yet to play more than 56 games in a season. This does technically have him playing a full year. Last year, he played close to a full year because it was the shortened season that only had 56 games. But otherwise, he has yet to play even close to an 82-game season. So we have no reason to believe that this is going to change in this upcoming season. I'd like for Karlsson to play close to a full 82 games, but it's unlikely to happen. And so for those games where Erik Karlsson is sitting out due to injury or whatever, that once again leaves a gap on the right-hand side. And really the only player on the offensive side of things who could actually fill in would be Ryan Merkley. And so suddenly he'd be the guy the Sharks turn to in those last couple of minutes to get a 6-on-5 goal. He'd be the guy on the first power play unit. And I think he'll be able to step into that role decently well. I don't think he'll necessarily be amazing on the defensive side of things, but I do think he'll be able to rack up the points because that's exactly what he is good at, and that's why I believe he can get up to that 40-point mark. Even when Erik Karlsson is healthy, Merkley will still likely be second power play guy as long as David Quinn doesn't decide to try the Mario Ferraro on the power play experiment for the millionth time done by a coach of the San Jose Sharks, even if it doesn't actually work. So I think Merkley should get that second power play time, and as such, 40 points shouldn't be too far out of reach for him. Next bold prediction has to do with the goaltending side of things, and this is that Kaapo Kähkönen will be the starter for the San Jose Sharks by the end of this coming season. The Sharks' goaltending has really cleared up over the past week since they traded away Adin Hill to the Vegas Golden Knights. The Sharks now running with just 2 NHL goaltenders, that is Kähkönen and James Reimer. Now, of course, Kähkönen, in the few games that he played at the end of the season for the San Jose Sharks, he was okay, nothing fantastic, but he was decent enough. However, of course, Reimer, through the entirety of last season, was rather impressive, and so normally you might think going into next season that Reimer would be the 1A starter at the very least over Kaapo Kähkönen. And for the first month maybe couple months of the season, this may very well be the case if the Sharks are actually going to try right out the gate to make it to a playoff spot, when that most likely fails, considering the Sharks roster is not necessarily good enough to make it to the playoffs for this season. I imagine they'll try and make that transition to Kaapo Kähkönen being the starter for the San Jose Sharks. Why is that? Well, it's kind of obvious, is that Kähkönen is significantly younger than James Reimer. Kähkönen has the potential to be the starter for the San Jose Sharks for the foreseeable future, not necessarily as a long-term franchise goaltender for this team. I don't necessarily see him being the starter or on the San Jose Sharks at all in the next 10 years, but for the next 3 to 5 years, if he does well enough this season, I could definitely foresee that happening. Reimer, on the other hand, like I mentioned, is significantly older. This is his final year of his 2-year contract with the San Jose Sharks, and he may not even finish this entire year out with San Jose. He could very well be moved at the deadline as a rental if he plays good enough in the games he will get this upcoming season, and it is unlikely that Reimer would re-sign with the San Jose Sharks, mostly because the Sharks, unless something crazy happens in the upcoming off seasons, they're probably not going to be super competitive for a Stanley Cup over the next couple of years. And with Reimer in the twilight of his career, he might want to try and go for a team with a better chance at it. So I imagine, coaching staff-wise, the San Jose Sharks would like to transition over to Kähkönen to kind of get him ready for the next couple of seasons where Reimer will not be a part of the San Jose Sharks franchise. The next bold prediction here is that Hertl will be playing better than he did last season. And you may look at that and say, is this really all that bold of a prediction? Well, I do want to make mention of a couple of things. First of all, Hertl statistically was actually pretty good this past season. 30 goals, 64 points. It's not going to be super easy to perform better, or at least significantly better than that, which is what my bold prediction would be. But on top of that, the secondary reason for why I'm saying this is not necessarily just points wise, but it's actually play wise, because even though Hertl managed to get those 64 points, he basically brute forced that. I feel like he was a player who I honestly didn't necessarily believe was all that dominant, all that amazing this past season. Compare him to Timo Meier, who obviously did have 12 more points, which is a pretty decent amount of points, but I don't think 12 points is the same gap as it was between how well Meier played and how well Hertl played. Meier, to me, looked like 20 to 30 points better than what Hertl did. Hertl was, even in some of the games where he was still accumulating points, he might have an assist in one particular night or even a goal in a particular night, and yet I would still feel as though Hertl was not necessarily all that dominant, especially when you compare it to some past seasons in his career. Now, of course, I am just going to be speculating about this next thing, but I believe that this could be because of the fact that Hertl had a lot of outside pressure on him with what his future would be. Obviously, it was the final year of his contract, and he was deciding whether or not he wanted to sign long-term with the San Jose Sharks and remain with them for the most of his career, or if he would want to get signed to a completely different team, move across the country or something of that nature, and play with somebody else for the rest of his career. Of course, he would also be waking up time and time again, considering all of the trade rumors surrounding him. He was probably waking up time and time again, wondering whether or not he'd wake up to the news that he would be on a completely different team for the rest of that season. So I can imagine for a player like Hertl, who seems to be much more sort of happy-go-lucky, very much a very emotional type of player, that this type of outside pressure that was looming over him could potentially have a negative effect on his game. Obviously, the constant interviews of him saying, "Oh, I'm just trying to focus on my game," is, it's one thing to say that, but it's another thing to really fully believe that. So now that I think that Hertl's future is settled, he's with the San Jose Sharks, he has control over where he is going to be for the foreseeable future, I think he will be much more able to focus on his game, and I do think he will be significantly better than he was last season. I don't necessarily think that means he's going to get 80 points, 90 points, and get far outperforming his point totals from this past season, but I think play-wise, he will be significantly better. That is my bold prediction. And finally, we have a bit of a negative one, I guess you could say, and this is a bold prediction that, even though I have it written down here, I hope it does not come true, but I worry that it very well might, and that is that Bordeleau will not play many games in this upcoming season. By many games, I mean he probably will play less than half of the season. Now, why is is that because a lot of people coming into this year seem to think that Eklund and Bordeleau are pretty much locks to make it to the San Jose Sharks roster, and I would like to believe that that is indeed the case. But unlike with Eklund, who has very many spots to take in the Sharks roster as a winger, considering Bordeleau is a center and likely will be playing center, probably won't be flexed to the wings, it's significantly more difficult because, of course, the Sharks' top six center-wise is entirely locked down. They have Hertl and they have Logan Couture. At the end of last season, Bordeleau got to be the Sharks' third-line center for the last few games of the year, but who's to say that he'll be able to take that spot once again, especially with David Quinn at the helm, who, of course, we know his history with younger forward prospects. And the Sharks also have a couple of more options in this particular role. Not only does there continue to be Nick Bonino, who, even though I felt as though he was not good this past season, I imagine his reputation will still allow him to get that third-line center spot. But there is also the new addition of a centerman that Mike Grier brought in, Nico Sturm. And while he was a fourth-line center with the Minnesota Wild and Colorado Avalanche this past season, his main reason he noted for signing with the San Jose Sharks was that he felt he could take the next step in his career with San Jose. And logically, the next step from fourth-line center is to become the third-line center. So it's very possible that there was some sort of discussion with him and Mike Grier and potentially the coaching staff that if Nico Sturm were to sign with San Jose, that he would be given a fair shot at winning the third line center position. So there's a bit of a logjam in that particular role. And so at that point, Bordeleau might even have to fall to fourth line center. And I know many coaches prefer to have a more veteran type of reliable defensively fourth line center in that particular role. So it's possible at that point that Bordeleau will either fall to healthy scratch levels or down to the Barracuda. And like I mentioned, I don't want to see this happen. I would much prefer Bordeleau be given just the keys to that third line center spot and have him play in that role for the entirety of next season unless something disastrous were to happen and he were to play terribly. But I don't necessarily think that is guaranteed to happen. And so my bold prediction, sadly, is that Bordeleau will not play much of this upcoming season. But that will do it for this video. Like I said, I have not had much success with my bold predictions. Last year it was a bit of a disaster, so we'll see if any of these manage to come true. But I am a bit more confident about these 5 than I was last season. Class dismissed.